Welcome to podcast Sarah and Michael.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the deep dive.
Hey, so glad you could join us today.
Yeah, we are absolutely thrilled you're here because we are trying to make sense of just a truly chaotic global moment right now.
Chaos is honestly the best word for it.
Right. I mean, if you are listening to this on a smartphone or driving a car or even just eating anything grown with modern agriculture, the situation we're diving into today is actively threatening the supply chain behind every single one of those things.
It really is. The ripples are massive.
So today we are unpacking the 10-week-long U.S.-Iran war, the one that erupted back on February 28th. We're synthesizing reporting from a bunch of international and regional outlets, specifically pulling a lot of great details from BBC News Thai and Bangkok Biz News.
Yeah, their regional coverage has been fantastic for this.
Exactly. And the absolute center of gravity for this entire crisis, the thing you really need to care about, is the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, that narrow little stretch of water is basically dictating the rhythm of the entire global economy right now.
Literally dictating it.
Right. We're looking at this unprecedented chokehold on international trade, which has now been followed by this sudden, incredibly fragile attempt at peace negotiations.
Which is why we're so glad to have you with us on this deep dive to help untangle the mechanics here. How does a localized maritime standoff spiral into a global crisis?
Well, the stakes here extend way beyond typical geopolitical posturing. This is real-world impact.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the physical reality of the strait itself, because before we can understand the peace deal on the table, we really have to understand the sheer scale of the disruption that forced both sides to stop shooting in the first place.
Exactly. The before and after is jarring.
Right. So before the joint U.S.-Israel attack in late February, that waterway was seeing, 40 to 60 massive commercial ships passing through every single day.
Yeah, anywhere from 40 to 60. It functioned as this largely unrestricted global artery.
Just a massive highway.
Right. But post-attack, Iran fundamentally altered its posture. They abandoned the whole concept of the strait as an international transit corridor.
They just openly weaponized it.
Openly weaponized it. I mean, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi made a definitive statement to their parliament. He basically said, the Strait of Hormuz will never return to the previous status quo.
Never. That's a strong word.
Very strong. They've transformed it into a toll-collecting checkpoint. It's a source of income now, a leverage mechanism against the West, and a physical security buffer for their regime.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy, because I think of it like the world's most critical toll booth.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, and a traffic jam at this specific toll booth doesn't just make you late to work, it literally causes a global fertilizer crisis that could starve nations.
Yeah, the cascading effect on the global supply chain is immediate. The reporting highlights severe global shortages across the board.
And oil and gas are the obvious ones, right? Everyone thinks of oil when they think of the Middle East.
Sure, those are the obvious casualties, but the secondary shortages are what really illustrate the danger here.
Yeah, let's talk about those.
We are seeing critical drops in helium supplies, for instance, and raw materials for fertilizer.
Wait, helium. I want to unpack the mechanics of that, because it isn't immediately obvious why a Middle Eastern waterway closing means, a tech factory in Taiwan suddenly can't operate.
Right, the helium connection is wild. It's a perfect example of how interconnected these systems are. Because helium isn't just for, party balloons.
Right.
In a liquefied state, it is an absolute requirement for cooling the superconducting magnets in MRI machines.
Oh, wow.
And it's vital for manufacturing semiconductor chips, the brains of your smartphone or your car.
So where does the strait come in?
Well, a massive percentage of the world's helium is produced in Qatar. It's a byproduct of their natural gas extraction. And all of Qatar's exports have to sail right through the Strait of Hormuz. So when you put a bottleneck on that waterway, you aren't just trapping oil.
You are starving the global high-tech sector of its most critical cooling agent.
Exactly. And the mechanism for the fertilizer shortage works the exact same way.
Right, because modern synthetic fertilizer relies heavily on ammonia, doesn't it?
Yes. And creating ammonia requires massive amounts of natural gas as a feedstock. So you jam up this specific maritime bottleneck, and you essentially starve the global agriculture sector.
Which is terrifying. The sources we looked at explicitly note that for nations lacking independent, robust food supplies, a sustained disruption here translates directly into a starvation crisis.
And that underlying economic terror, that's what drove the initial military escalation.
Right, the U.S. response.
Yeah, the United States launched Project Freedom specifically to counter that bottleneck.
Right.
The goal was to deploy American naval power to physically escort commercial shipping through the strait.
Basically forcibly maintaining the global supply lines.
Exactly.
But then we saw this sudden, massive whiplash in policy. The U.S. just suddenly suspended Project Freedom.
Yes, citing mutual consent and significant diplomatic progress.
Which is wild. And what's fascinating is how entirely different the narrative becomes, depending on which country's media you consume.
Oh, the media spin on this is incredible.
Right. The U.S. administration is projecting this as a massive diplomatic victory. They're claiming their pressure forced Iran to the negotiating table.
Naturally.
But meanwhile, Iranian state media is broadcasting this to their domestic audience as a humiliating retreat by the U.S.
Yeah, they're framing the suspension of those naval escorts as a total failure of American naval power.
So what's actually happening there?
What's fascinating here is that both sides are just utilizing a classic face-saving maneuver.
How so?
Well, in high-stakes brinkmanship like this, neither leadership can afford to look like they blink to their domestic base.
Right. You can't look weak.
Exactly. So by mutually agreeing to pause operations, the U.S. gets to claim its deterrence worked, and Iran gets to claim it successfully repelled an imperialist footprint.
Win-win for the PR departments.
Pretty much. The contrasting spin provides the political cover necessary for both governments to just temporarily step back from the edge of a wider war.
Okay, so that pause on the water translated into this deeply uneasy 4-week ceasefire, which pushed everyone to the negotiating table.
Right.
Now, the initial talks in Islamabad collapsed completely. They ended totally empty-handed. But according to Bangkok Biz News, there is a new document in play.
Yes, the new MOU.
Negotiated by the U.S. team, specifically Trump's reps, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And honestly, I really struggle with the scale of this.
Why is that?
It's a one-page, 14-point Memorandum of Understanding. I mean, I have to push back on the viability of this. Is a one-page document really enough to solve a 10-week war?
It does sound crazy when you put it like that.
It sounds structurally inadequate. It's like putting a Band-Aid on an earthquake fault line, especially when we're talking about a multi-domain conflict threatening global food and tech.
Well, your skepticism is completely warranted if you look at this document as a peace treaty. But that is not its function at all.
Okay, so what is it?
What's fascinating here is that you have to think of this MOU as a 30-day structural scaffolding.
Scaffolding, okay.
Yeah, it's not designed to solve the underlying geopolitical animosities. It's designed to act as a hard pause, a save point, if you will.
Just to prevent the complete collapse of the global supply chain.
Exactly. It simply buys 30 days for diplomats to actually sit down, likely in Geneva or Islamabad, to argue over the detailed permanent treaty.
Okay, if we view it as a 30-day save point, let's look at the actual trades being proposed in this one-pager to keep that structure standing.
Let's do it.
The U.S. is putting a lot on the table. They're lifting the naval blockade, they're initiating a reduction of economic sanctions, and they're unfreezing billions in Iranian funds held in foreign banks.
That is a massive concession.
Huge. And the core trade-off, the Iranian concession for all of that, is a suspension of their uranium enrichment program.
And the nuclear math is the central friction point of those upcoming 30 days.
Right, because the timelines are totally different. The U.S. entered negotiations demanding a 20-year absolute freeze on enrichment.
20 years?
Yeah, and Iran countered with, what, a 5-year freeze?
Yeah, 5 years.
Yeah.
But regional sources indicate the final number will likely land somewhere in the 12 to 15-year range.
Okay, 12 to 15. But the critical component is what happens after that freeze expires, right? Because the MOU caps Iran's uranium enrichment at 3.67%.
Yes. That specific number is key.
We hear that 3.67% figure constantly in nuclear reporting. Can we just explain why that specific decimal is the red line? Like, why not 0 and why not 10%?
It's a great question. It all comes down to nuclear physics and what they call breakout time.
Breakout time, okay.
So to generate electricity in a standard civilian nuclear power grid, you only need uranium enriched to about 3.67%.
Got it. Just for power.
Right. But to build a nuclear warhead, you need weapons-grade uranium, which is enriched to roughly 90%.
That is a huge jump.
Massive. And getting from 3.67% to 90% requires an enormous amount of time, energy, and, spinning centrifuges.
So it's a buffer.
Exactly. By legally capping Iran at the civilian threshold, the international community ensures that if Iran ever decides to suddenly sprint for a bomb, it would take them months to enrich the material.
Which gives the world ample warning to intervene.
Precisely. And the enforcement mechanisms being discussed alongside this are severe.
Oh, yeah. There's active discussion about physically removing existing stockpiles of highly enriched uranium from Iranian territory entirely.
Right, possibly relocating it to the U.S.
Which is wild.
Huh.
And pairing that with a regime of unannounced surprise inspections by the UN.
Yeah, those are profound concessions. They strike right at the core of Iranian state pride and their whole security doctrine.
Truly. And while those two adversaries are trying to finalize that one-page save point, the sheer economic gravity of a closed strait is forcing all the neighboring nations to fundamentally rewrite their strategic alliances.
Just to survive the fallout.
Exactly. The United Arab Emirates is the clearest example of this scramble. I mean, they are physically located right next door to Iran.
Right in the crosshairs of any regional spillover.
But the UAE has this geographic trump card, right? The port of Fujairah.
Yes. Fujairah is such a vital piece of this puzzle. It's an engineering and geographic workaround to the Strait of Hormuz.
How does it work?
Well, the vast majority of the UAE's coastline sits inside the Persian Gulf. So normally their shipping has to pass through the strait.
Which is currently a toll booth.
Exactly. But Fujairah sits on the eastern side of the Hajar Mountains, facing the Gulf of Oman and the open ocean.
Yeah.
It's completely outside the strait.
Ah, so it bypasses it.
Yes. The UAE built this massive overland pipeline capable of pumping millions of barrels of oil a day right across the desert to Fujairah, completely bypassing the choke point.
That is a brilliant physical bypass valve.
It is, but it also makes them a target. Because that pipeline is their sole economic lifeline in a blockade scenario, it makes the UAE intensely vulnerable to Iranian sabotage.
Which explains the massive military buildup we're seeing. The UAE is buying billions in American weaponry, but far more shocking than that is their new alignment with Israel.
It is a historic paradigm shift. The defensive posture Israel is taking in the UAE right now is unprecedented.
Yeah, the BBC reporting confirms Israel has actually deployed elements of the IDF and its Iron Dome missile defense system directly onto UAE soil. I mean, the geopolitical irony here is heavy.
Oh, it's incredibly heavy.
You have the UAE, an Arab state that has historically been very cautious about deep public alignment with Israel,
Right.
now literally hosting Israeli military personnel and defense infrastructure to protect an oil pipeline from a fellow Islamic republic.
It really highlights how geography dictates destiny here.
And especially when you consider Israel explicitly denied requests to send the Iron Dome to Ukraine to defend their cities against Russian missiles, but they send it to the UAE.
Well, Israel's calculation is deeply pragmatic. Protecting the UAE's oil bypass ensures a stable global economy, sure. But more importantly for them, it allows Israel to cement a highly advanced, integrated air defense coalition directly on Iran's doorstep.
Ah, so they get a forward operating base, essentially.
Basically, the threat of the strait closing has aligned Israeli and Gulf Arab security interests in a way that decades of traditional diplomacy just never could.
Wow. And the shifting alliances don't stop in the Middle East either. China is being pulled aggressively into this diplomatic fray.
Yes, China's role here is crucial.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi actually hosted Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi in Beijing, explicitly urging peace and advising against further confrontation.
And the mechanism driving China's involvement there is pure energy dependency.
They need the oil.
They desperately need it. China absorbs roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports.
90%.
Yeah. So if the Strait of Hormuz remains contested, China's domestic manufacturing base loses its primary energy feed.
Which is why they are stepping in?
Right. Beijing stepping outside its traditional policy of non-interference to actively pressure Iran. That just shows how a physical maritime blockade can force a superpower to adjust its global posture.
Which brings us to the domestic political realities driving all of this. Why do the leaders of the U.S. and Iran feel so pressured? We're watching this incredible paradox where both administrations are acting highly aggressive publicly, but they both seem absolutely desperate to finalize this one-page MOU behind closed doors.
Well, foreign policy is almost always a reflection of domestic survival. Let's look at the U.S. constraints first.
Okay.
President Trump is navigating a really treacherous political path right now. He needs a diplomatic victory to stabilize global markets and bring down fuel prices for American voters.
Because pain at the pump translates to pain at the ballot box.
Exactly. However, he's politically boxed in by his own legacy. He cannot accept any deal that critics might portray as weaker than the JCPOA.
Right, the Obama-era nuclear agreement that Trump famously dismantled.
Exactly. So he needs a deal, but it has to look like a historic, unmatched win.
Which explains his strategy. It appears to be a mix of market manipulation and the classic madman theory.
Yeah, he's actively utilizing social media to pressure oil traders to keep prices low.
Meanwhile, you have U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivering incredibly dissonant messaging.
Oh, the messaging is all over the place.
Right. Rubio publicly stated that the aggressive, kinetic phase of the war is over. But then simultaneously, he labeled the Iranian leadership as lunatics and questioned their capacity to even honor a deal.
Right. And hovering over all of that diplomacy is Trump's explicit threat that if negotiations fail, the U.S. will resume bombing at a significantly heavier scale.
It's a high-wire act.
It really is, attempting to coerce a deal through overwhelming threat without accidentally triggering the exact war you are trying to avoid.
Now, on the Iranian side, the domestic calculations are completely different. The IRGC Navy released a statement recently that I just found fascinating.
The one about international shipping.
Yes. They publicly thanked international shipping companies for adhering to Iranian regulations in the Strait.
Which is quite the spin.
Right, and they heavily implied that if aggressor threats cease, maritime traffic could return to a normal, safe baseline.
It's a calculated diplomatic signal, but it's wrapped in militaristic rhetoric.
Exactly.
They're offering a return to normalcy, but only under the premise that Iran is the rightful sovereign authority regulating that normalcy.
But the internal pressure on the Iranian regime is what makes them such a volatile negotiating partner. I mean, a Western leader faces pressure from polling data, right? Or economic indicators.
Sure.
The Iranian regime measures stability entirely through its capacity to maintain absolute control.
And that is the critical distinction. The BBC analysis points out the sheer tolerance for internal suffering this regime possesses.
It's staggering.
We are talking about a government that deployed lethal force against its own protesting citizens in the streets just this past January. They are largely insulated from the economic pain of their own citizens.
Right. Their primary red line is regime survival.
Exactly. They are willing to weather catastrophic economic damage if they believe conceding to the West makes them look fatally weak to their internal security apparatus.
So if both sides have such massive domestic reasons to look tough and uncompromising, who actually blinks first? I mean, we're left with a terrifying standoff.
It is terrifying.
Trump needs a deal that looks like a total capitulation by Iran to satisfy his domestic critics. And the Iranian regime needs a deal that proves they successfully stared down the American military without bending.
Right.
If both sides view looking weak as an existential political threat, how does anyone actually sign a lasting treaty?
Well, that irreconcilable difference is exactly why the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation remains extremely high.
Because maximum pressure hasn't stopped enrichment in the past.
No, it hasn't.
Yeah.
And now we are relying on a single page of scaffolding to hold back decades of entrenched hostility.
Oh, wow.
The economic gravity of the closed strait is forcing them to talk, but the political reality of their domestic bases makes true compromise incredibly dangerous for both leaders.
Okay, let's pull the lens all the way back as we wrap up and just look at the sheer scale of the disruption we've just walked through today.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We started with 40 to 60 ships a day floating peacefully through a narrow 21-mile wide waterway. And suddenly, a 10-week hot war weaponizes that water, threatening the global supply of food, energy, and the semiconductors, powering the very device you are using to listen to this deep dive right now.
As that physical blockade birthed a frantic diplomatic scramble, incredibly fragile 14-point MOU aiming to trade sanctions relief and frozen billions for a deeply contested 12 to 15-year freeze on nuclear enrichment.
Right. And while the diplomats argue over enrichment percentages, the physical map of the Middle East is literally being redrawn.
Absolutely.
We're seeing the UAE completely bypass the waterway via the Fujairah pipeline. We're seeing Israel deploying the Iron Dome to an Arab state. And we're seeing China stepping in to desperately keep its primary oil pipeline flowing.
It really forces us to confront a profound reality about how global power actually functions in the modern era.
How do you mean?
Well, we spend so much time analyzing the grand strategies of superpowers, right? The deployment of aircraft carriers, the nuances of nuclear treaties.
But at the end of the day, all of that grand strategy is currently being held hostage by a single, narrow stretch of salt water.
Exactly. It is the ultimate vulnerability of an interconnected world. I mean, think about it. If a mere 10-week disruption at one geographic choke point can force Israel to defend the UAE and prompt China to act as a global peacemaker and threaten the food supply of nations thousands of miles away.
It begs a really critical question for you, the listener, to ponder.
It does. As we look at the next century of geopolitics, Will global dominance be dictated by who has the largest military or the biggest economy? Or will it simply be dictated by whoever controls the physical toll booths on the global highway?
It is a sobering thought to leave you with. The physical geography of our planet still has the power to bring the entire global economy to its knees. And right now, we are all just hoping that 30-day scaffolding holds the weight.
We really are.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep an eye on those grocery and gas prices because whether you realize it or not, they are tied directly to whatever happens next in that strait. We will catch you on the next one.